all the presenters and all the individuals who have intervened in different workshops, panels, and discussions that took place during those 2 days. I have participated in in some of the discussions. I was so glad to be part of those discussions, working groups as well. And I am confident that those discussions will serve in the end the main goal of this conference, which is promote freedoms and protect activists. As we have promised you at the outset of this conference, we will come out with outputs and recommendations in this regard. That is why I would like now to ask Ms. Yasmin Abu Mansour from the OHCHR to take the floor in order to present the main findings, outputs, and recommendations that the participants have reached after 2 days of rich discussions. Ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The International Conference on Social Media, Challenges and Ways to Promote Freedoms and Protect Activists was organized from 16 to 17 February 2020 in Doha by the Qatari National Human Rights Committee in cooperation with the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, the European Parliament, the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, and the International Federation of Journalists. The conference brought together more than 250 governmental and non-governmental organizations, human rights defenders, media workers, the tech community, international human rights mechanisms, and national human rights institutions. The conference discussed the opportunities that social media have created for promoting human rights, while also exploring recurrent forms of interference in the use of social media. The participants identified examples of social media use contributing to the exercise of human rights. They also explored the impact of restrictions to online speech established by national laws and policies on journalists, human rights defenders, political activists, and social media influencers. They also discussed responses to hate speech in practice and the use of social media platforms to incite violence and discrimination, including against religious minorities. The participants emphasized that communications have changed in irreversible ways over the last 2 decades, and that civic space has moved online. Social media platforms have become key fora for public participation, opening channels for critical voices who were isolated before. However, hosting massive quantities of private data, social media platforms can also be a powerful tool for surveillance or attacks of critical voices. Furthermore, laws prohibiting the use of encryption, banning so-called fake news, or defining online defamation have led to violations of internet standards for freedom of expression and the right to privacy. Participants also discussed how various laws relating to counterterrorism, preventing violent extremism, cybercrime, lèse-majesté, sedition, and hate speech are being used to target civil society and persecute critical voices under criminal charges. Participants stressed the importance of reviewing those laws, especially as some contravene international norms and standards, contain vague or overly broad definitions of crimes, lack of any form of adequate judicial oversight, and call for severe penalties that are disproportionate to the gravity of crimes. The following ground rules should guide all stakeholders when debating online content regulations: legality, Any restrictions to content must be provided for by laws that are precise, public and transparent. Specific notice must be given to those whose speech is being restricted. Restrictions must be appealable, and erroneous decisions must be rectified. Vague formulations should be avoided. Necessity. In accordance with international law, the least restrictive measures available should be employed to moderate content, and this is rarely criminalization. The effectiveness of the measures taken should be regularly assessed. Public accountability. All rules for content moderations and grounds for interventions should be based on inclusive consultation processes with all relevant stakeholders. All rules and decisions should be subject to independent oversight. Access to remedy. Procedural safeguards should be respected. For example, access to independent courts or tribunals. Government agencies should never be the arbiters of transparency. The standards against which a company decides about takedowns and prioritizes information must be publicly available. Regular transparency reports should reflect all actions and decisions relating to restrictions of online content, including government requests to take down information. Throughout the plenary debates and throughout the working groups, the participants made the following key recommendations to various stakeholders. The states should ensure that restrictions on online expression are lawful, necessary, and proportionate. Repeal any law that unduly criminalizes or restricts expression, both online and offline, while prohibiting by law and advocacy for national, racial, religious hatred that constitute incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. Refrain from establishing laws or arrangements that would require the proactive monitoring or filtering of content, which is both inconsistent with the right to privacy and likely to amount to pre-publication censorship. Adopt models of regulation where only independent judicial authorities rather than government agencies become the arbiters of lawful expression. States should also avoid delegating responsibility to companies as adjudicator of content. Establish or strengthen national human rights institutions in line with the Paris Principles and ensure that national human rights institutions are not subject to reprisals or any act of intimidation as a result of their mandated activities, including online. Include a protection of national human rights institutions within national cybersecurity policy, plans, and infrastructure. Recommendations to social media companies. Social media companies should use international human rights law as reference and accept the company's responsibility to ensure protecting online civic space in accordance with the guiding principles on business and human rights, notably in cases of internet shutdowns and in terms of transparency. To uphold, as a starting point, the Santa Clara Principles on transparency and accountability in content moderation, and implement the recommendations by the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression. To improve responses to online attacks, intimidation, and threats against critical voices, including through greater cooperation among technical experts, civil society actors, and companies to improve the reporting and ensure accountability. As a temporary measure, social media companies should include human rights defenders and journalists as a protected category under their harmful content policies, particularly in countries where defenders face persecution by the state or are not protected by the government from retaliation for their advocacy. To explore all legal options for challenging requests that are excessively intrusive, such as requests for shutdowns. If they implement shutdowns, companies should disclose all relevant and publishable information and provide regular updates about the services affected or restored, the steps they are taking to address the issue, and explanations after the fact. To comply with human rights due diligence frameworks, to avoid fostering or entrenching discrimination through algorithmic systems and maximize user choice when accessing information. To develop proposals to transfer some of the profit made by social media companies to protect and safeguard, in particular, local and independent news outlets. Recommendations to human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society at large. They should ensure that all perspectives, including of those of underrepresented groups, are brought into the decision-making about regulation of online content and in the formulation of community standards. Advocate for enhanced media literacy in national education curricula and build capacity of civil society actors amongst peers in relation to the use of social media. To provide legal aid to human rights defenders and journalists in emblematic cases related to freedom of expression online. Enhance the implementation of global standards of journalism, including the International Federation of Charter of Ethics for Journalists. Media outlets should provide adequate training to enhance online safety and security-aware staff, in particular those conducting investigative journalism. Social media users, human rights defenders, journalists should ensure that they use appropriate tools such as encryption in order to protect themselves, but also their sources. International and regional organizations should ensure that all discussions on the formulation of laws and regulations for social media are firmly grounded in human rights law. International human rights instruments provide an authoritative global standard for ensuring freedom of expression and right to privacy online. To consider how to expand civic space online, including through drafting an international declaration on the protection of civil society operating on social media. Strengthen the response to attacks and attempt to undermine vibrant civil society and independent journalism. To engage with new and traditional media to address hate speech narratives, the values of tolerance, non-discrimination, pluralism, and freedom of opinion and expression. And to take all possible measures to enhance the protection of human rights defenders and journalists who operate in conflict situations, from Afghanistan to Syria and Yemen. They risk their lives every day to report on violations of international law on social media, and they continue to be monitored, intimidated, and killed. Recommendation to national human rights institutions. They should promote and protect online civic space, including by advising the states on national legislation and policy to ensure they comply with international human rights obligations, interacting with civil society organizations, users, journalists, media, and engaging with business on their responsibility to respect human rights. Implement the Marrakesh Declaration of 2018 on the role of national human rights institutions in promoting and protecting civic space and human rights defenders with a specific focus on women. Monitor and report on civic space online and offline through the collection and analysis of disaggregated data, including gender-based disaggregation and statistics related to killings, fabricated legal charges, misuse of specific laws, and other attacks against human rights defenders, journalists, trade unionists, lawyers, students, academics, in line with Sustainable Development Goal 16. The participants of the conference recognize that national human rights institutions have an important and unique role to play in promoting and protecting online civic space and safeguarding human rights due to their mandates and functions under the Paris Principles and their independent and authoritative status. Participants express their gratitude and appreciation to the Qatari National Human Rights Committee and the State of Qatar for hosting the conference. All relevant stakeholders are encouraged to implement these recommendations. The participants are also encouraged to utilize these recommendations in their work and in their advocacy to promote freedoms and protect activists, both online and offline. Thank you very much. Shukran jazilan.
أشكر السيدة.
I would like to thank Mrs. Yassine Abu Mansour for sharing the outcomes and the recommendations that you have come out with in this international conference. I would like now to give the floor to our partners in this conference. And I will start with Mrs. Georgette Gallo, the head of the Operations Department and the OHCHR.
Well, at the outset yesterday, we raised a number of questions that we were seeking answers to at this discussion, at this event. And based on the discussions and the recommendations, it seems very clear to us that the answers are clear, and the recommendations go a very long way toward addressing social media and ensuring that what happens there and what happens to users are framed in human rights. So we at the UN Human Rights Office will use our best efforts to advance these recommendations with politicians, with political leaders, with tech companies, and with civil society. And really urge you all to work with us in making these recommendations become a reality. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا سيدة جورجيت. والآن
Thank you, Mrs. Georgette. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Mark Parabella, the Vice President of the Arab Peninsula and the European Union.
Gentlemen, we have explored these important 2 days, how the role of the media has been forced to adapt into an increasingly unstable world. Indeed, even in Europe, we have witnessed recent tragedies in which journalists such as Daphne Caruana Galizia clear. The balance between freedom of expression, free speech and human rights has reached unprecedented level of freedom, as well as the access to communication both online and offline. The freedom of expression is crucial to the promotion of democratic values and to the mobilization of people. Social media have been extremely useful to civil society and have produced social and political changes around the world. Of abuse and offense, but the solution is not to close them. And we fully agree with her. The purpose of our conference is to find a balance between human rights and the role of social media. It is clear that the international community still has a long way to go guarantee the right of freedom of speech for all. However, looking back at the progress made in Europe and in the world in the last decades, people and civil society must be constantly motivated to continue to fight for human rights. To conclude, I would like to thank Dr. Ali Al-Mari and the National Human Rights Committee of Qatar to have organized this important conference in Doha. Be reassured that we agree on the principle debated in these 2 days. The European Parliament will be on your side in this important battle.
We would like to thank Mr. Mark and the European Union for being main partners in this conference and for their continuous support with us. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Anthony Blonghi, the Secretary General of the IFJ, International Federation for Journalists.
Bonjour à tous. Je vais donc parler en français comme hier.
I would like to speak in English. I would like to thank at the beginning Mr. Almari, Mr. Concantopinos, and I would like to thank you for working with a great team. I would like to thank Mr. Beltahar also for providing the best advice. I would like to thank you both, and I would like to thank the Human Rights Council in Qatar. And I would like as well to thank my colleagues from the European Union, as well as the OHCHR. On behalf of the International Federation for Journalists, IFJ, I would like to thank all the colleagues coming from all over the world. There are more than 50 colleagues who join us. They're talking different languages. And of course, they have contributed to this international conference in addition to other participants. And this is what allows us to succeed in this conference. I would like also to talk about the social media. 1 out of 2 people are using these platforms, including the youth. I'm really happy and pleased because we're not here alone as politicians, journalists, academics, and researchers. I'm really happy and pleased for having students among us. And students who speak French and are living here in Doha, or they're studying here. I also remember the education of the youth, how to use the social media to have access to the best information. This is what we're doing at the IFJ on a daily basis. It's pretty clear also that the social media need to raise awareness and need to work on education more and more. We need to work with the users more and more to raise their education. And when we talk about the social media, we cannot but mention the charter of the IFJ and the code of ethics also for the work of journalists. This code also reminds us of the rights and the duties of the journalists. And on this occasion, we should be careful and cautious in every step we take as journalists. We should also remember that we should protect the sources of our information. We said in one of the sessions, we've talked about the importance of the sources of the journalists. I'm not talking here about those who are revealing or identifying corruption, but on all our resources. As to the recommendations, they are complete, and I cannot but feel proud that those recommendations mean a lot to all the participants at this conference. I'm really proud for organizing this session with Mr. Almari, because he has promised to follow up on the implementation of those recommendations. And unfortunately, there are many recommendations usually that we come out with after any conference, but we do not follow up on its implementation. We at the International Federation for Journalists, we always conduct sessions and meetings in order to follow up on the implementation of the recommendations. And we will be working with our partners in this regard, with Mr. Almari and others. I think today's are not enough to discuss this very important topic, which is about the social media, journalism, and journalists as well. I think we have opened a window and we've tried to find some of the answers to our questions and issues raised. But I would like, in front of all of you, to suggest to organize another version of this conference in order to follow up on the implementation of the work done and to identify the levels and where did we reach in the implementation of the recommendations. I'm not only talking about the progress when it comes to journalism, but also to implement the recommendations at all levels. At the level of at the academic level, at the journalistic level, and trade union levels as well. So in 2 years or maybe more, I suggest to organize a similar conference here or anywhere else to follow up on the work. Thank you. We would like to thank Mr. Anthony for his speech, and of course we hope to have many conferences and events that will help us follow up on this very important topic, which is to protect the defenders and the activists. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Carlos Negret Mosquera, the President of the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, GARI. The floor is yours. Of course, in your organization, you have exceeded all our expectations. And in these 2 days, we have really shown that our democratic system has a long way to go, especially if you want to follow up with our behavior on the social media. The second issue is that the opportunities available in front of us and the way to face those challenges is to protect the human rights. Those digital platforms are the best platforms to protect human rights. This is why it's very important to continue our path and our journey that you have started in this conference. It's very important to work on the legislations and laws that protect the human rights and the basic freedoms. And of course, we still have a lot to do at the level of the Global Alliance. We still need to cooperate in order to provide strategic plans that comprehend all our perspectives. And in the end, we would like to praise the suggestions, which is to follow up or to form a follow-up committee in order to follow up on the recommendations of this conference. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Carlos. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Christian Seif, the head of the European Union and the head of the Friendship, the Qatar Friendship Association at the EU.
Distinguished audience, as President of Industry, Energy and Research Committee, which deals also with digital policies and artificial intelligence, and also Chair of Friends of Qatar in the European Parliament, I would like first to congratulate Qatari National Human Rights Committee and Dr. Ali Al-Mari and his team for this excellent international conference. I feel honored to be a guest of this prestigious conference, and I'm convinced that this type of initiative can strengthen international cooperation and lead to new ways to face challenges and threats in a more and more digitalized world. Social media, as it was stated many times during these 2 days, certainly brought numerous benefits in our societies. It simplified our communication, increased access to information, expanded our networks and partnerships, and increased the visibility of our work. For politicians, social media provided a new form of dialogue with the public and an important way to increase citizens' involvement in political life and governance of their communities. For human rights activists, many of you present here, social media is a powerful tool to come to the aid of victims, trigger international action, expose authoritarian regimes, stop abuses, and increase overall transparency around the world. New technologies have helped civil society network to grow across borders. Defending human rights became a shared responsibility after the United Nations unanimously adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As a representative of the European Union, I stress that we have attached particular importance to respect for human rights, both within and outside our borders. Through European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights, EU channels critical support for human rights and human rights defenders around the world, while a human rights clause is included in all our external agreements. We believe that without human rights, there cannot be lasting peace or security and no sustainable development. Coming back to social media, while its benefits are undeniable, they come with a series of challenges, threats and risks, also discussed in depth during the 2 days of this conference. These risks are more and more complex and difficult to deal with as technology is in continuous development. Social media has been the last years weaponized to spread disinformation, interfere in elections, and promote and incite violence. Websites and applications are continuously collecting data of their users, often without them being aware of it and without knowing how their personal information is being used. Digital technologies have also created new opportunities for authoritarian state actors to contain activity and expression on social media, often under pretext of national security. After long pressure of EU lawmakers and multiple investigations and hearings, I am glad to notice that social media companies looks that they have finally started to take this problem more seriously, and I welcome Mark Zuckerberg's commitment made yesterday in Munich Security Conference to better fighting security threats, harmful content, terrorist propaganda, and disinformation campaigns. In our committee that I am chairing, Committee for Industry, Research and Energy, we discussed many times that technological advances within the fields of artificial intelligence, 5G and 6G networks, machine learning, and automated decision-making processes are being made at a rapid pace. I believe these advancements have the potential to generate a direct positive impact on social media, especially in issues such as identifying and removing hate speech, process that requires an increased attention to detail. In the same time, these new technologies of the future could pose unprecedented challenges across multiple sectors. For this reason, the European Union has been working on developing ethical guidelines to underpin artificial intelligence development on strong principles, such as diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, privacy, transparency, human oversight, safety, and accountability. These principles could be taken over also by other countries in the world, as it is in the case with GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. Also, the European Union took the initiative for a regulation on preventing the dissemination of terrorist content online in order to increase efficiency in combating radicalization and enhance public security. And there are difficult discussions between the three institutions of the European Union to finalize and conclude this. Within the European Parliament, debates on digital issues are constant, formally within our parliamentary committees as well as informally within working groups as European Internet Forum. Finally, I encourage everyone present at this event, representatives of governmental and non-governmental organizations, human rights defenders, social media platforms, think tanks, universities, international experts and prominent personalities to engage in a continuous dialogue with European Union representatives, as you will always find in us a reliable partner to defend human rights, human dignity, freedom of expression, thought and religion, democracy, and the rule of law. Thank you so much.
أصحاب السعادة والمعالي.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, activists, organizations, and victims around the world are looking at this conference and seeing a real start in it towards protecting activists. We will deploy every effort in order to discuss with our partners how can we set an executive plan and a mechanism in order to translate those words into actions and to include that in international agendas. This is a new start, a new launch to discuss this topic with international entities. Before I close, I shall say we shall not forget the victims of conflicts around the world. We have to be the voices of the victims in all international platforms. The National Committee for Human Rights in the State of Qatar, and through taking the initiative of organizing this conference in Doha, is looking forward to further cooperation and coordination with the different partners and with you, despite the deterioration taking place at the level of human rights around the world. The Arab legal movement has been affected since 2011, and such conferences are an opportunity to gather Arab institutions with its peers in Africa, in Europe, and all around the world in order to put this movement back on the track and to guarantee an effective local body that would guarantee the human dignity of individuals and groups. Once again, I thank all our partners for making this international conference a successful one. I would like to thank OHCHR as well as the European Parliament, the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, and the International Federation for Journalists. Of course, I would like to thank in particular Mr. Jim Abu Melha for the great role he has played and the efforts he have deployed in order to make this conference possible, for all the collaboration he has made with us and with the partners. I would like to thank the audience. I wish you a kind stay in Qatar, your second country. I would like to thank all the contributors and everyone who has deployed effort in order to make this conference a successful one, media, translators, journalists, and organizers. I would like to thank as well Bonaparte French School, who have attended this conference and made interventions in the working groups of this conference. I would like to thank you all once again for making this conference successful, and I wish you a kind stay and a happy one in Qatar. Hopefully we meet soon in other conferences, other gatherings, in order to discuss human rights and give us hope to achieve more at the level of promoting human rights and enhancing those rights around the world. Thank you. Session closed.